Thank you, Interfax, Ksenia Golovanova. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I wanted to ask, in connection with Zelensky's visit to the United States, and the agreement reached on the supply of the Patriot battery to Ukraine, is it possible to talk now about the full involvement of the United States in the conflict in Ukraine? What could be the consequences of this decision, and, for example, whether Russia can move its systems closer to the borders of NATO countries, or even to close proximity to the United States? You have just said whether it is possible to talk about greater involvement of the United States in the conflict in Ukraine. I would, let me joke, I would suggest looking at this problem shirshi and deeper. What exactly and why? Because the United States has been doing this for a long time. It has long been involved in the processes that took place in the Soviet and post-Soviet space. But even in Soviet times, whole institutes worked in Ukraine. They were well aware of the history of this issue. There are deep specialists there who are professionally versed in this. I repeat, back in Soviet times, everything was prepared, the soil was prepared, people were searched for, meaning was determined, and so on. Well, I don't want to now. This is not the format where it would be possible to delve into the history of the issue, but nevertheless, everyone understands where everything came from. This is a very subtle question. The unity of the Russian world. Divide and conquer. Since ancient times, this slogan has been in effect, and is still actively used in real politics. Therefore, our potential opponent, our opponents have always dreamed about it, and have always been doing it. They tried to divide us and then lead us in separate parts. There's nothing new here. The idea was born a long time ago by itself of Ukrainian separatism within the framework of a single country. Well, you see, I've been talking about it all the time. If someone thinks that a separate ethnic group has formed, wants to live independently, for God's sake, it is impossible in any case to go against the will of the people. Russian culture, part of this language, part of this history, traditions, and against the will of that part of the people who feel themselves in a different hypostasis, considering themselves part of the Russian people and the Russian world, believe that they are part of this culture, part of this language, part of this history, traditions, and against you can't fight them either. And they launched a war against them in the 2014 year. It was the war, because that was what it was about. And what is it if air strikes were carried out directly on the center of cities with millions of people? And what is it if troops with armored vehicles were deployed against them? This is war, fighting. We all endured, and hoped for some kind of peace agreements. Now it turns out that we just have a nose in the department. So a country like the States, they've been doing this for a long time ago. And just in this sense, we can say that today's events, if they brought us to this, in this sense, we can say that they have achieved their result. But we also had no other choice but the actions that were launched at the end of February this year. Yes, this is the logic of the development of events. But our goal is primarily to protect people, I repeat once again, who feel part of our people, part of our culture. After all, we proceeded from what at the time? We proceeded from the assumption that, okay, the Soviet Union has ceased to exist, but, as I said yesterday at the board of the Ministry of Defense, but our common historical roots, the roots of culture, spiritual community, they will be stronger than what pulls us apart, and there have always been such trends. Everything that unites is stronger. No, with the help of outside forces, after all, and with the help of the fact that, in fact, after the collapse of the Union, people of extremely nationalistic views actually came to power. And with the help of these forces, this, despite all our efforts, this disunity has been increasing, it has been getting worse. As I said once, first we were pulled apart, separated, and then pitted against each other. In this sense, they have achieved a result, of course. We have suffered a certain fiasco in this sense, but we have left nothing else. Maybe on purpose too, and pushed us to this line. But we had nowhere else to retreat. That's the problem. Their involvement was always in full, they tried. I don't remember, then look through these pages of history there. One of the deputies of the Tsarist State Duma said, if you want to lose Ukraine, attach Galicia to it. That's how it turned out in the end. He turned out to be a visionary. Why? Because people from this part, they behave very aggressively, and actually suppress the silent majority in the rest, in the main part of this territory. But, I repeat once again, we proceeded from the fact that the fundamental foundations of our unity, they will be stronger than those trends that pull us apart. No, it turned out that this was not the case. Russian culture, the Russian language, and our spiritual society began to be suppressed, and they began to divide it. And in completely barbaric ways. And no one pretends that no one notices. And why? But because it pursues the very goal of which I said, divide and conquer. No one wants the unification of the Russian people. Dissociation, please, it will be gladly shredded further. But no one wants unification and strengthening, except us. And we will do it, and we will do it. And you are military technically, you know, because what is the point? The fact is that, as I said yesterday, we have a frigate, Marshal Ustinov of the Soviet Union, going into combat service at the beginning of January. And there's Gorshkov, and new weapons systems are already appearing there. We are not going to arrange any provocations, but still this is a factor in strengthening our actual strategic forces. Although these systems are medium-range, but not such high-speed characteristics that they give us certain advantages in this sense. Well, as for the Patriots, and the systems are quite old, and it does not work, so to speak, like ours with 300. But nevertheless, after all, those who oppose us proceed from the fact that this is supposedly a defensive weapon. We'll just keep that in mind. And there is always an antidote. So those who do it are doing it for nothing. It's just prolonging the conflict, that's all. Let's go right here, let's go, please. Good afternoon. Zvezda TV channel, Konstantin Oveshnikov. If I may, one more question about a special military operation. Traditionally, you rather sparingly assess the course of the operation, prefer not to go into details, but still, do you not see the threat of acquiring a situation of a very protracted nature? You know, I've already said that. In fact, the situation began to take shape. It was so much less noticeable, even in our country, and in the West. They preferred not to talk about it at all, and not to notice it at all. But it all started in the 2014 year after the coup, provoked by the same states, when pies were distributed there on the Maidan. I have already said this many times, but our goal is not to spin this flywheel of a military conflict, but on the contrary, to end this war. We strive for this, and we will strive for it. Well, as for the fact that we, Ilya, are stingy or talk little about it, but it's natural. On the one hand, I may be stingy about this, but the briefings of the Ministry of Defense are held daily. And they impose reports on our public in the country about what is happening, where it is happening, how, and so on. Therefore, we will strive to ensure that this is completed. And the sooner the better, of course. As for what is happening and how, well, I have already said many times, the intensification of hostilities leads to unjustified losses. The chicken pecks grain by grain. Let's continue, please. Please. Thank you very much, Alexei Petrov, Russian TV channel. Vladimir Vladimirovich, my question is in continuation of the topic, in fact. Recently, the idea has been actively exaggerated in Western political circles, including at the NATO level, that the resources of the West, which are being transferred to Ukraine as assistance, are not unlimited, they are, in fact, running out. At the same time, a number of Western experts believe that Russian resources are also running out, that the last missiles, the last munition is about to be launched. This is familiar rhetoric, but nevertheless the state of our military-industrial complex. Is our CPC capable today, on the one hand, to replenish those stocks that are needed, on the other hand, to produce enough to continue a special military operation? That is, first of all, I think that the resources of Western countries and NATO countries are not on the verge of exhaustion. It's something else. The fact is that Ukraine receives weapons from the former Warsaw Pact countries, mainly Soviet-made. And this is really close to exhaustion. There we practically knocked out everything. We burned several dozen armored vehicles there, hundreds of them, something else on such a scale. Well, they knocked out a lot, it's true. And this technique, it is close to exhaustion. But this does not mean that Western countries and NATO countries do not have other equipment. That's not the question. The question is that it is not so easy to switch to new weapons systems, including the NATO model. It is necessary to prepare, it is necessary to train personnel, it is necessary to have stocks of spare parts. It is necessary to maintain it, to repair it. This is a big question, and it is not easy, the first one. Secondly, there are issues related to the capabilities of the military-industrial complex of Western countries. It's big in the States, you can promote it, but it's not so easy there either, because you need to allocate additional money to this account. And this is a question of allocating resources within the framework of the budget process. It's not that simple. Therefore, the dacha, look here, now they say patriots can be put there. All right, let them put it on. We click and patriots. Then it will be necessary to put something there instead of Petrov. We need to develop a new system. It's a complicated, lengthy process, it's not that simple. As for, we take this into account, we also consider everything that appears there. We consider where and how much is left in the warehouses, what they can produce, in what time frame, how they can prepare staff, and that's it. As for our capabilities and our reserves and so on. But so are they. We spend them, it's understandable. I'm not going to name the figures now, how many shells I spent per day, for example. These are big numbers. But the difference between us, say, and those who oppose us is that, say, the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. But if it has not completely reset, then it is rapidly moving towards this. There will soon be no own base left, and we have it only growing. Moreover, as I said yesterday at the board of the Ministry of Defense, we will not do this to the detriment of other sectors of the economy. We don't care one way or another, the minister reported yesterday, we need to provide for the needs of our army. And unlike, let's say, the same industry in Ukraine, we have developed our industry over the past decades, including the defense industry. We have been developing our military science and technology. We're missing something else. We see barraging ammunition there, drones and so on. But we have some groundwork. We know who can do how much, when, and in what time frame. We have our own financial resources to ensure the work of scientific and technological centers and the production itself. We have it. Yes, there is a question related to increasing the pace and volume. We are able to do it, and we will definitely do it. Come on, please.
Rossiyskaya Gazeta and Sergei Konova. Vladimir Vladimirovich, in this situation, as far as it is still possible, are there any real chances of a diplomatic resolution of the situation in Ukraine?
All conflicts, all armed conflicts end in one way or another with some kind of negotiations on the diplomatic track. And we have never refused. This Ukrainian leadership has forbidden itself to negotiate. Well, this already looks somewhat unusual, even strange, I would say. Nevertheless, sooner or later, of course, any parties in a state of conflict sit down and agree. The sooner this realization comes to those who oppose us, the better. We've never given up on that. Come on, Valera. Valery Sanfarov, Vesti FM. Mr. President, you have been meeting with the military a lot lately, and that's why I have a question. Does that surprise you? No. Every day, so that you understand. Every day. The question of heroes. When you were going to this state council, you passed Kutuzovsky Prospect, and next to it were the streets of General Torokov, Rayevsky, Barclay de Tolya, Vasilisa Kazina. In principle, the state council itself was held in that hall, where there are also 11,000, if I'm not mistaken. Plaques of heroes, St. George's heroes. Does a special military operation give birth to national heroes and generals, and do they appear in our lives? Of course, any armed conflict, unfortunately, is associated with losses, is associated with some tragedies, injuries, and so on. And, as a rule, you know what? After all, those who pass away defending the interests of their fatherland, their homeland, their people. Those who get injured are the strongest guys. Here they are ahead. That's the thing. And, of course, they are heroes. I've talked about it many times. This is my personal deep conviction. But just imagine, but here we are sitting, standing now in this hall, in the Kremlin Palace. We are warm, the sun is shining artificially above us, the light bulbs are on, the interior is beautiful. And the guys are there in the snow. Do you understand? We are talking about in soles, in boots and so on, about weapons. They come under fire and so on. But, of course, they are all heroes. This is a colossal work associated with danger to health and life. Heroes, of course. But there are those who show special actions related directly to what is called heroism, personal heroism. Not just hard work, but personal heroism. Of course, and we have to think. We are thinking about it. We will definitely be engaged in setting them as an example to our entire society. As an example for the younger generation for the future. It is precisely such people who strengthen the inner spirit of the nation. This is very important. And they certainly are? Yes, there are many of them. You probably know them yourself. We don't know about some and some of them yet, we haven't named them, but we will definitely do it.